Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto married Ino Yamanaka in the future. 16-year-old Ino is stuck in the body of her older self. Now she must embark on the journey of an adult, a wife, and a mother while deep down she's still just a child herself. What does the future have in store for her? Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 1, The Jump. Ino collapsed in a heap in the chair and slumped her head on the wooden bench. The delicious aroma of broth filled her nostrils, which made her stomach growl. Ino groaned and looked up into the awaiting eyes of the ramen stand owner. "Bring me the largest bowl of ramen you have ever seen," she ordered. Teiuchi laughed. "The only person who orders that is Naruto." Ino smiled, then slumped once more. Her day was rough and all she needed now was some comfort food. She knew that overeating wasn't healthy and she preferred to stay slim, but when you needed comfort and there was nowhere else to get it, then food was the best. Her blue eyes fluttered open when she felt movement beside her. She turned her head and blinked when she spotted a familiar face staring at her with a goofy grin. Speak of the devil, Ino yawned and sat up. "Hey Naruto." Naruto grinned. "Were you talking about me?" She ordered a large bowl of ramen, Teiuchi stated as he placed a bowl in front of Ino. Naruto seemed impressed that Ino was even daring to swallow down so much ramen. Ino stared at the bowl and gulped. After dinner she will probably need a toilet break. A really uncomfortable toilet break. "Old man, bring me the same," Naruto exclaimed. Teiuchi nodded. Ino grabbed a pair of chopsticks, pulled them apart and then dug into her meal. Silence enveloped the two blondes. Naruto's order arrived and soon the two were slurping up noodles in unison. Ino felt oddly comfortable sitting next to Naruto while practically shoving her face with food. Usually she kept her binge eating to herself. All well, Naruto was stupid, he won't pick up any unhealthy signs. Ino picked up the bowl and swallowed all the broth. When she finished she placed the bowl on the bench and sighed in contentment. She felt much better now. In fact, she felt amazing despite the fact that she just ate twice the amount she usually does. "You know what?" Ino suddenly spoke out loudly. "Teiuchi-san, bring me seconds." Teiuchi smiled and nodded. Naruto stared wide-eyed at Ino. "What?" she asked, feeling conscious. Was there something on her face? Naruto shook his head. "Nothing, just surprising, that's all. Girls usually diet and whatnot." Ino averted her gaze. She really did not want to talk about diets with Naruto right now. Instead, she got a great plan. "Naruto, order another bowl and we'll have a race." Naruto's eyes lit up. "You're on." Naruto ordered another bowl. The two silently waited for their ramen so that their contest could begin. Naruto glanced at Ino. She looked terrible. Her hair was a mess, there were dark bags under her eyes. It was a shock. Ino always looked alive and sophisticated. She would rather die than have someone see her in the state she was currently in. Ino knew that Naruto was watching her. She fought the urge to look at him. He was probably wondering what happened to her. It did look like she encountered a tornado after all. Ino wiped some sweat from her brow and stifled a yawn. She shifted her gaze to the steam that rose from the boiling broth. Ramen smelled so good. Ino smiled as she stared at the puffs of smoke silently. It almost felt like she was floating. Ino snapped her eyes open and sat up. A blanket was draped over body. Ino frowned and stared at the couch she was resting on. Confused, she scanned her surroundings. She was in an unfamiliar living room decorated with fine furniture and paintings. Nervously Ino stood up and wiggled her toes on the wooden floor. Where was she? Wasn't she at the ramen bar just seconds before with Naruto? Confused, Ino moved towards the arch that led to the rest of the house. On her right was the front door. At least, she thought it was the front door. On her left side was a long hallway that led to the rest of the house and a staircase that led to the second floor. Opposite the living room was the dining room. Ino wearyingly entered the dining room. There no one there. Ino groaned when she felt pain pulsate through her head. She rubbed her temples whilst trying to figure out where exactly in the world she could be. It wasn't Naruto's place, he lived in an apartment. It wasn't her house either, her parents could never afford a mansion like this. She highly doubted it belonged to Teiuchi and Ayame either, that would just be weird. The dining room was connected to the kitchen. In the kitchen all Ino saw was a cold cup of tea and a sink filled with cold soap water. Nervous, Ino opened some of the cupboards. They looked plain, filled with food and daily necessities to live. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She also recognized some local produce logos, which meant she was probably still in Konoha. That was good, at least. Curious, Ino left the kitchen and headed for the stairs. She slowly ascended one step at a time, her heart was racing inside her chest. Ino sighed. Why was she so nervous? You're in a stranger's house, Ino, she scolded herself. Of course she would feel nervous. Ino mentally made a note to search for some aspirin while she was upstairs. Maybe they kept their medicine in the bathroom? She hoped so. Ino was halfway up the staircase when she heard the front door behind her open. She froze. She could feel her heart leaping in her ribcage. This was bad. What if a spy sneaked into Konoha and has been pretending to live here all this time? What if she was captured to use as a hostage? Ino tried to piece all kinds of theories together. Finally she decided to turn around and face the person who arrived. Inhaling a deep breath, she turned around. Her hand clutched on the wooden railing for support. Stop it, Ino. You are a ninja. Ino scolded herself. She was acting like a baby. Ino finally shifted her gaze to the person who opened the door. She felt her blood ran cold. The figure was tall, dressed in red and white robes and a matching hat. The Hokage? Tsunade-sama? Ino asked herself as she gaped at the figure. The person had his or hers back turned to her and was closing the front door. Ino frowned as the stranger turned around. The person's chest was flat. He or she was clearly missing Tsunade's well-endowed chest. There was no way it could be Tsunade. Besides, Ino's eyes were trained to find the difference between male and female and she could clearly tell by this person's broad shoulders that it was a man. Ino furrowed her brows. Who was this man? And why was he wearing the Hokage robes? The man lifted his hands and pulled the hat from his head, revealing spiky blonde hair and two long bangs that framed around his face. The stranger then proceeded to pull the robes over his head, revealing long navy pants with a matching shirt and a flak jacket. Ino gaped when she recognized the 3 whisker marks on his one cheek. The man turned to face her and Ino's blood ran cold. Staring at her were 2 pools of beautiful blue. A blue so familiar, Ino couldn't believe what she was seeing. She opened her mouth to say something, but her throat was dry. Naruto Uzumaki's face lit up when he saw her. Hey, you're home. I thought mother was going to keep you busy all day? Ah well, I'm not complaining. Ino was flabbergasted by Naruto's face. He didn't look like a 16-year-old boy anymore. He was taller, older, and looked wiser. Ino couldn't help but notice that he has become increasingly handsome too. Naruto looked like a man. And not just any man. He looked like the 4th Hokage. Ino frowned. Was this a dream? Was she dreaming of an older Naruto? This had to be a dream. Naruto pulled off his sandals and stretched his arms above his head. Ino noticed that he has hung the Hokage robe and hat on a coat stand beside the door. Naruto yawned then stepped inside onto the wooden floor, his shoes lay forgotten on the small tiled area in front of the entrance. Slowly, Naruto ascended the stairs until he reached the one just beneath the one Ino was standing on. They were exactly the same height this way. Ino gulped when she noticed the odd look Naruto was giving her. You alright? Naruto asked. You look pale, did mother overwork you again? Ino didn't know how to respond. This is just a dream, Ino. Just a dream. Ino told herself, but she was really starting to doubt it. Do people have headaches in dreams? She highly doubted it. Her headache felt real. Heck, Naruto's breath fanning her face felt real. He smelled like mint and coffee. It was an odd combination, but it was a familiar scent. Like Ino encountered it every day. That's impossible. Ino told herself. Her mother hated coffee and her father barely even ate mints. She never encountered it at home, so why was it so familiar? Ino. Naruto's voice stirred her from her reverie. She blinked, but still could not find her voice. Naruto's expression suddenly became very worried. Ino was surprised. She has never seen him so concerned before. Her eyes widened when Naruto lifted his arm and reached out to her. Her cheek tingled when Naruto's hand cupped her cheek. She stood still. She couldn't muster the strength to push him away. Why was he doing this? Whoa, Naruto breathed, you're really hot, do you have a fever? Ino once again remained silent. Her heart was racing at a deadly pace in her chest as Naruto's warm fingers tickled her skin. His hand moved to her hair where he brushed a blonde lock out of her face and tucked it behind her ear. "Na Naruto," Ino finally mustered. Her voice croaked. She sounded like an old woman. Naruto's blue eyes shifted to hers. Was all that came from the blonde. Ino inhaled a deep breath to try and calm herself. "Where am I?" Ino asked. Finally she gathered the courage to ask what has been bothering her since she woke up in the living room. She noticed Naruto's shock. His hand that had been affectionately stroking her blonde hair froze, followed by his brows furrowing. "What do you mean?" Naruto asked. "You're in Konoha, where else?" Ino pursed her lips into a thin line. So she was in Konoha. But the question is, where in Konoha? Or more like, when in Konoha? "Naruto," Ino mumbled, "how old are you?" Naruto seemed even more confused at her next question. 37, Ino, we celebrated my birthday 2 weeks ago." Ino froze. 37? Did he just say 37? No, that couldn't be. There was no way he could be that old, because that would mean she was also that old. She was only 16. She was eating ramen with Naruto earlier. And they were 16. This was a dream. Just a really bad dream. I don't think I feel too well," Ino breathed as she clutched Naruto's arms. She felt dizzy and her feet were wobbly. She was losing her balance. The front door opened and a cool breeze washed through the house. "Whoa," a voice breathed, "Hey Dad. You're home early." Ino stared wide-eyed at the blonde-haired girl that stood in the doorway. Familiar blue eyes stared proudly back at her, a light shade of blonde hair spilled from the girl's head. She looked in her young teen years. Ino gaped. "Who is that Naruto?" Ino asked. "Did she just call you Dad?" Ino felt Naruto tense. She also noticed the girl's confused expression. "Ino," Naruto breathed as he grabbed her forearms and tightened his grip on her, "you don't remember giving birth to her." When those words escaped his lips, Ino did the unimaginable. She fainted. Chapter 2, Mirror, Mirror. Ino's eyes fluttered open and met the white ceiling. She groaned when she realized she had a headache and sat up. Was it all a dream? Ino asked herself. She glanced around the room. She was neatly tucked beneath a colorful quilt in a room she did not recognize. The room was neat and tidy, with the only furniture being a cupboard, a desk, a chair, and the double bed she was resting on. Ino closed her eyes and shook her head. She was still dreaming? How could that be possible? Ino kicked her legs over the edge of her bed and stood. The carpet felt light and soft beneath her bare feet. Ino stepped outside the room and noticed that she was on the second floor of the house she awoke in before. She frowned. "I'm still dreaming," she asked herself. Sighing, Ino spotted the bathroom and dashed to the toilet. She lifted the seat and groaned when she puked every last bit of the large bowl of ramen she had. Ino collapsed on the floor and sighed. She felt terrible. Ino stood up and washed her face, then drank as much water as she could swallow. Ino shook her head, enjoying the cold water against her skin, and opened her eyes. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. "Is that me?" Ino asked. Her reflection looked mature, older, and amazingly, a lot more beautiful than she remembered herself. Her blonde hair was cut short into a bob and her blue eyes shone like diamonds. 2 golden hoops hung from her ears in place of the silver rings she usually wore. "That can't be me," Ino exclaimed mentally. Why would she cut her hair so short? Ino loved her long hair. Sure, she cut it during the Chunin exams, but only to use as an advantage to fight Sakura. She made sure to grow her hair again after that. "Yo," a voice lazily greeted. Ino jumped and spun around, coming face to face with a familiar, yet different face. She blinked. She blinked twice and then rose her eyebrows. "Shikamaru?" she asked hesitantly. The brunette man yawned. "When did you grow a goatee?" This time Shikamaru quirked an eyebrow. "I've always had one." Ino gaped as she stared at her teammate. He was taller with broader shoulders. His hair hung loose on his shoulders and a small goatee has magically appeared on his chin. He looked a lot different from what she remembered. "You alright, Ino?" "Naruto called me and he sounded frantic." "Naruto?" Ino mumbled as she gazed at herself in the mirror once more. "I don't know, I woke up here suddenly and then he appeared out of nowhere." Shikamaru laughed. "He didn't appear out of nowhere, Ino. He lives here. It's natural for him to appear here, don't you think?" Ino furrowed her brows. "You don't understand, Shikamaru. I'm 16. I can't be 37 like Naruto said." Shikamaru's amused smile vanished and was suddenly replaced with a frown. 16. Did you just say you're 16? Yeah, Ino replied. Shikamaru pursed his lips into a thin line. I'm listening. I see, Shikamaru breathed as he lit a cigarette. Shikamaru and Ino were sitting outside on a bench in the garden of the large mansion. Ino was surprised that the house seemed even bigger on the outside. Konoha looked the same, yet different at the same time. Some buildings have changed and Naruto's face has been added to the Hokage monument. Ino could do nothing but stare at it in amazement. Naruto was Hokage, she couldn't believe it, even when Shikamaru confirmed it. So, Shikamaru stated as he inhaled a deep puff of smoke and then exhaled, you say your 16-year-old self and somehow got stuck in your future self. Ino shrugged, that's what I gathered. I know you probably don't believe me. No, Shikamaru grunted, I believe you. You do? Ino asked, surprised. She was expecting Shikamaru to jump up and then accuse her of being an intruder and lock her up somewhere where they will contact her father to interrogate her and whole bunch of other nonsense. Yeah, Shikamaru stated, if something like Edo Tensei exists, I'm sure there's some forbidden jutsu that make you travel through time or whatever it is that happened to you. Ino looked down at her hands that rested in her lap. That's the thing, this all feels like a dream, it doesn't feel real. Shikamaru watched his teammate from the corner of his eye. You'll get used to it. Ino clutched her skirt, that's the thing, I don't belong here, Shikamaru. I belong in the past. I need to get back and allow my future self to come back to her body. Shikamaru sighed, troublesome as it is, I'll help you. I get that you feel out of place here, but until I find an answer, you will have to play along. Ino quirked an eyebrow, play along. Shikamaru nodded, you have to go on as if nothing has changed. In other words, you have to do what you of this time would do. Ino blinked. How was she going to do that? She had no idea about her life here and the encounter with Naruto earlier frightened her. He acted so familiar with her. Like they were lovers. Don't you remember giving birth to her? He had asked her. Ino froze as that question echoed through her. It couldn't be, could it? Ino could feel her blood run cold. It all made sense now. Why she awoke in that house. Why Naruto talked of mother instead of my mother or your mother. Why the little girl looked so familiar. Why the girl called Naruto dad. And why Naruto asked her that question. It all made sense, but Ino had to make sure. She turned to face Shikamaru. Naruto, he's my husband, isn't he? Shikamaru glanced at Ino from the corner of his eye. He was debating whether he should answer the question or not. After a while of awkward silence he gave in, yes. Ino didn't know what to say. Up until this whole nightmare began, she was enjoying ramen with the blonde as a friend. Now they were married. And not just married, they had a daughter. Ino cringed. She wasn't a virgin anymore. The thought was a lot more disturbing than she thought it would be. I think I need a shower, Ino mumbled as she stood up and looked up at the Hokage monument. She stared at Naruto's face in disbelief. Shikamaru nodded, all right. I'll contact you as soon as I have information. It might take a while, but I'll do everything I can in between my other important duties. Ino smiled gratefully at her teammate and watched him leave. She couldn't help but finally notice his Tsunagakuer-style flak jacket. She quirked an eyebrow. What the? Deciding that she would ask him later, Ino turned around and stepped inside the house that supposedly belonged to her. Naruto was nowhere in sight, but she did hear movement in the kitchen as well as the aroma of onions filling the house. Someone was cooking food. Ino's stomach growled. After puking her guts out, she has gotten hungry again. Ino made her way upstairs where she locked herself in the bathroom and stripped. After her shower, Ino grabbed a towel, dried herself and then wrapped it around her body. Quietly she unlocked the door and slipped downstairs and into the kitchen. Naruto was standing before the stove, his eyes focused on a wok with stir-fry. It smelled fantastic. She never knew Naruto could cook. Looks like she's in for a bunch of surprises. Naruto. Ino called. Naruto's head whipped around, but his alarm faded when he noticed it was her. Ino felt blood rush to her cheeks when she noticed Naruto's gaze shifting to her breasts. Men. Always so predictable. Ino cleared her throat. Naruto quickly looked back up into her eyes. Where is my clothes? Naruto blinked, then grinned, in our room. Ino opened her mouth to say something, but Naruto interrupted. Shikamaru told me. You mean? Ino hesitantly asked. Yeah, Naruto shrugged, you were in the shower when he came back. He told me everything. Including the 16-year-old bit. I'm sorry I scared you earlier. Seeing me act that way must have been weird. Ino shook her head, it's alright. I just really need clothes. Sure, Naruto stated as he explained which room belonged to them upstairs and which wardrobe was hers. He couldn't go with her since had to keep an eye on the food, but Ino was more than happy to navigate herself. She quickly sprinted upstairs, already feeling the cold air getting to her, and entered the main bedroom. It was huge. Well, Naruto was the Hokage, him having a huge house made sense. To think this was her house too, it was unbelievable. Ino found her wardrobe easily, and when she realized it was walk-in she felt like squealing. She's always wanted a walk-in closet as a child, now she had one. And it was filled to the brim with clothes, shoes, and accessories. Ino felt like a queen. Ino dressed in a blue kimono decorated with ocean waves. It was simple, but beautiful, and she loved it. When she pressed the fabric to her nose, the lingering scent of her mother's favorite washing powder filled her nostrils. So she still used the same washing powder as when she was a child. That made her feel comfortable. Ino decided that shoes were not necessary, neither were accessories, but when her eyes landed on the golden hoops she had on earlier she couldn't resist. They suited her. After clipping on her earrings she looked satisfied at herself in the mirror. Ino reached up and pulled her fingers through her short blonde hair. She was disappointed that her long hair was gone earlier, but now as she looked at herself, she realized that the short bob suited her. She looked feminine and mature. Ino smiled at herself. Perhaps this life won't be so bad after all. Chapter 3, Dinner with the Uzumaki Family. When Ino returned to the kitchen, the dining table was set and Naruto was moving the wok from the stove to the table. Ino frowned when she realized the table was set for 4 people. She glanced at Naruto, but his back was turned to her, so he didn't see her questioning gaze. When he finally turned around he smiled. You look great, he stated. Ino knew he wanted to say more, but he was probably holding back because of their situation. Thanks, Ino mumbled. Dinner. Naruto yelled loudly. Naruto grinned, have a seat, Ino. Ino nodded and sat down at the lonely seat on the left side of the head of the table. She suspected that Naruto, being the man of the household, sat at the head of the table. Naruto gave her an odd look, but didn't say anything. Ino shifted in her seat. Footsteps echoed from upstairs and then the girl from earlier that afternoon appeared in the doorway. She was dressed in yellow sundress and her blonde hair was tied up in 2 pigtails. She glanced at Ino, gave her a toothy grin and then sat down diagonally opposite Ino. Naruto sat at the head of the table, leaving the seat on his right side empty. Naruto's eyebrow twitched, where's your brother? Ino felt her heart leap. She had a son. Ino smiled as she tried to imagine the boy in her head. The girl shrugged, I don't know. Naruto sighed and glanced at Ino, who was staring at the plate before her with a smile on her lips. Naruto stood up and disappeared. Ino could hear his movements upstairs. Ino looked up and glanced at her daughter. She had Naruto's blue eyes, but definitely her blonde hair. Ino shifted in her seat again. She felt really awkward and out of place. Finally Naruto returned with a blonde boy following him. He looked around 5 with the same spiky hair as his father, but the same pale blonde as Ino. The boy had blue eyes that shone like diamonds. Ino couldn't help but feel her heart linger to embrace the boy. He was adorable. The boy climbed on the seat on Naruto's right. All right, Naruto stated, let's eat. As Naruto and the children jumped into a usual routine of dishing and talking about their day, Ino sat silently and ate her food as slowly as she could. If earlier she felt left out, she now felt like a perfect stranger. In her mind, she was supposed to be a young teenager living with her parents and would have bubbly conversation with them. Here she felt alien, despite the fact that she knew this was her new family. Ino mentally sighed. Mama. The little boy sitting across from Ino asked as he tilted his head to the side. Ino jumped and blinked. Yes. Ino hesitated and glanced at Naruto. She didn't even know the boy's name. What kind of mother was she? Oh, right, one who ended up in the future somehow. Will you play with me after dinner? The boy asked. Ino blinked. He wanted to play with her? The idea was intriguing, this way she could get to know them. Ino glanced at Naruto again. The blonde was silent, simply watching his wife and son converse while idly chewing on his food. Sure, Ino agreed to her son's request. The boy grinned. Ino smiled. Her son smiled like his father. It was cute. Will you play too, Dad? The boy asked as his attention shifted to his father. Naruto patted his son's head. Sure, Minato, Naruto beamed. Ino felt her throat tighten. Her son's name was Minato. He was named after the 4th Hokage. Ino knew that Naruto has always looked up to him, but he idolized the 4th this much that he would name his son after him? Ino glanced at Minato. Well, like his father he resembled the 4th greatly. It was surreal. Oh, so older sisters aren't good enough to play. Minato's sister hissed. The table fell silent and all eyes moved to the daughter of the family, her blue eyes were narrow. Ino saw herself in the girl right at that moment. It was hilarious. Of course you can play too, sis. Minato grinned as he poked his sister's nose. She did not look impressed and gave him a very cold glare. Ino glanced nervously at Naruto. Was this normal behavior for the two of them? They weren't going to fight, were they? Did you just poke me? Minato's sister growled. Minato giggled as his sister attacked him with relentless tickles. Ino sighed in relief. Luckily the girl was only playing with her younger brother. All right, stop it you two, Naruto finally interrupted, finish your dinner. We'll play as soon as the dishes are done, all right. The two nodded and continued with their meal. Ino couldn't believe how mature and in control Naruto was with the children. He was like a completely different person from the boy she knew. After dinner, Naruto and Ino washed the dishes while the children played together in the garden under the last few rays of the sun. Ino watched them from the window above the sink and smiled. They looked so happy. So peaceful. Great, aren't they? Naruto asked. Yeah, Ino agreed. What's her name? I didn't quite catch it. Kaguya, Naruto replied. You named her Kaguya after Kaguya Hime. Kaguya. The name fitted the girl perfectly. Ino felt her heart swell with love and pride. She was their mother. She produced 2 beautiful children. It was something she secretly always dreamed of and now she had it. But it didn't feel right. I'm sorry, Naruto, Ino whispered. Naruto looked up alarmed. For what? He asked. This whole situation, Ino sighed. I don't remember our relationship, I don't remember giving birth to the kids. How could I do this to you? Naruto shrugged, I'll get over it. Let's just keep it to ourselves though, okay? I don't want the whole world finding out. Enemies could take advantage of you this way. Ino nodded in agreement. She especially didn't want the children to know. The last thing they needed was being told their mother wasn't exactly their mother. That she was from the past and somehow ended up in her older self's body. If this could be considered time traveling at least. You go play with the kids, Naruto suddenly stated, I'll finish here. Ino thanked him, dried off her hands and rushed outside to join her children. She laughed when Minato attacked her. She stumbled backwards and landed on the grass. Kaguya joined in. Naruto watched this scene with a sad smile playing on his lips. He was really the only one suffering from this, wasn't he? Ino tucked the little boy underneath his blue quilt and kissed his forehead. In the few hours she spent with Minato and Kaguya, she fell in love with them. They were the most beautiful little children she has ever seen. Night, Mama, Minato yawned. Ino smiled and stroked his soft blonde hair. Night, Ino whispered. Minato blinked and scrunched his nose. Ino quirked an eyebrow at his sudden strange facial expression, something wrong. You stopped calling me honey, the boy pointed out. Ino froze. She called him that? She didn't know, of course she didn't know. Ino mustered a fake smile and stroked the boy's forehead. I'm sorry, honey, Ino whispered, is that better? Minato nodded, good, now go to sleep, son. Minato nodded and yawned again. Ino stood up from where she sat beside her son and turned off the lamp beside his bed. She glanced at him one more time, then left the room. She headed for Kaguya's room next. The room was purple, much like Ino's was when she was a teenager and the girl was sitting on her bed reading through some scrolls. Aren't you going to bed, Kaguya? Ino asked. Kaguya looked up from what she was reading, not yet, I promised Dad I would study these seals today. Oh, Ino breathed. Ino stood awkwardly in the doorway of her daughter's room. Say, Mom, Kaguya suddenly broke the silence. Was Ino's response. Being called Mom was still weird to her. Earlier this afternoon, you didn't know who I was, Kaguya trailed off. Ino bit her lip. She really hoped she could keep this a secret from the children, but Kaguya had heard Ino and Naruto that afternoon and she was 13 years old. She was intelligent and a ninja academy graduate. It would be natural for her to suspect something. Oh, that, Ino trailed off. What could she say? That she was her younger self stuck in her older self? No, she couldn't tell Kaguya. Kaguya might tell someone else and then the entire village will know about it. Ino couldn't take that chance. I wasn't feeling well. I was dizzy, so my sight was blurry. I mistook you for someone else. It was a pathetic lie, but the best Ino could do. Kaguya looked up from her scrolls and narrowed her eyes at her mother. Ino gulped. Her daughter was very observant. And her glare looked deadly. If you say so, Kaguya finally shrugged. Ino sighed in relief. That was close. Good night, Ino finally managed to say, don't go to bed too late, all right. I won't, Kaguya replied. Ino smiled and then left Kaguya in peace and headed downstairs. Minato was like Naruto. Hyper, fun and energetic. Kaguya was like Ino, but somewhere in her blood she had a very serious and calm side to herself. Ino couldn't exactly pinpoint which family member that trait came from. It certainly wasn't her. Ino wasn't known for being the calm type. Maybe someone on Naruto's side of the family. Naruto was in the living room, reading a book that dangerously looked like Ika Ika or something. Ino sat down opposite him and sighed. Naruto glanced at her from his book. Tired? He asked. Ino nodded. Kaguya was questioning me about this afternoon. Naruto didn't say anything and returned to reading his book. Ino sat calmly and watched him. He really was a completely different person. After a while of silence and staring, Ino stood up. I'm going to bed, I'll sleep in the guest bedroom. Naruto looked up from his book in alarm. Why, oh. Ino smiled weakly when he trailed off. Naruto looked away from her and tightened his fist. I'll sleep in the guest bedroom. You stay in the main bedroom. Ino blinked. Are you sure? Yeah, Naruto mumbled. I don't need the ensuite bathroom or the walk-in closet as much as you do. Ino chuckled, thanks, Naruto. He merely waved her off. Ino disappeared upstairs, leaving Naruto to sulk alone. Chapter 4, Disrupted. Ino was awoken by the sounds of banging pots. She sat up with a jolt and quickly pulled her messy hair together and tied it into a ponytail. The banging stopped, but now she heard two voices arguing. The one was definitely Naruto, his voice was unmistakable anywhere. Ino jumped out of bed and scurried downstairs. As she passed Minato's room, she realized the boy was already out of bed. Perhaps he was arguing with his father? Ino chuckled. She highly doubted it. Ino walked into the kitchen and nearly turned around right there. Before her stood Naruto actively trying to pull someone's hair out while yelling something about, tainting my son. Ino quirked an eyebrow at the scene. Morning. Ino half-asked, half-stated. Naruto stopped yelling and pulling and blinked, his eyes now focused on his wife who was still clad in her pajamas. The other person turned around, whilst pulling free from Naruto's grasp and straightened his hair with his fingers. Ino's breath swept away when she his face. Sasuke. Ino breathed, shocked when she looked into the raven's onyx eyes, is that you? The Uchiha remained passive, as if Naruto didn't pull his hair earlier at all, the one and only. Wow, Ino breathed. Sasuke was here, he was back. He had somehow returned to Konoha. She couldn't believe it. And he was wearing a Jonin uniform proudly with his headband on his forehead and the Uchiha crest embroidered on the sides of his sleeves. Hey, dub, Sasuke calmly stated as he pointed at Ino, what's with her? This is a common occurrence between us, why is she acting like she's seen my ghost or something? Naruto snorted, I'll tell you later, Teme. I first have some unfinished business with you. Sasuke rolled his eyes, of course, I'm tainting your son blah blah blah. Get over it, dobe. The minute you assigned your daughter on my team, you chose your children's fate. Now tell me what's wrong with Ino. Ino blinked. Sasuke was Kaguya's teacher? Ino glanced at Naruto, who was fuming and looked ready to use Rasengan and blow the Uchiha through the roof. Ino's sweat dropped. Looks like her previous opinion on adult Naruto was wrong. He was still the same as always. At least with Sasuke around. Alright, I'll tell you, Naruto sighed in defeat, but this is an S-class secret, if you even spill one word about this I will dash. Sasuke cut him off, Naruto, I've been in Umbu for 5 years, I know what S-class entails, calm down. Naruto scoffed, have a seat. Sasuke sat down by the dining table. Naruto and Ino joined him. So what's so dangerous that Ino's strange behavior is considered to be top secret? Sasuke asked, for all we know Naruto, she's probably just pregnant again. Remember how she nearly killed me when she was pregnant with Minato? No, she's not pregnant, Naruto sighed, at least, I don't think so. I'm not, Ino stated. She was a medic, she would know when she was pregnant. Or she would have at least seen the signs. The fact that she nearly killed Sasuke when she was pregnant with Minato did seem rather amusing, though. Alright, Sasuke sighed, what is it then? She's not the Ino we know, Naruto finally stated. Sasuke quirked an eyebrow, Naruto took this as his cue to continue, she believes she is 16. We believe it has to do with time traveling. Sasuke blinked, then burst out laughing. Ino stared wide eyes. Sasuke was not acting like himself at all. Sasuke pointed at Ino between his laughs, you think you're 16? That's hilarious. We're serious, Sasuke. Naruto hissed. Sasuke stopped laughing and quickly regained his serious vibe. Alright, Sasuke stated, so she's from the past or whatever, now what? Shikamaru is doing some research, Ino stated, until then I will just have to act like I belong here. Hopefully we can fix this. Sasuke nodded in deep thought. Silence enveloped them. Suddenly the door from the kitchen that led to the backyard opened and Minato ran inside, squealing and covered in mud. He ran and hid himself behind his mother. The three adults quirked an eyebrow. Minato? Ino asked. She never got a response for just then a red-headed boy stepped inside. Ino gawked when she realized he looked like Sasuke, only with red hair that sprawled around his face. He looked older than Minato, but younger than Kaguya. He wore navy pants and a blue shirt with the Uchiha crest on his sleeves. "Hey, Dad, have you seen Minato?" the red-headed boy asked. "Nope," was Sasuke's curt reply as he glanced at the hidden Minato. Sasuke had a son. Ino gawked, but then it occurred to her that it would be natural for others her age to have children. They were all adults now. "Oh well," the boy shrugged. Despite knowing where Minato is, he decided to play along. The boy pretended to look confused and then faced Ino. "Hey, Ino, why are you still in your pajamas?" Ino trailed off. She was surprised by how casual the boy sounded with her. Ino gathered she told others to call her Ino without any ant or mrs added in front due to it making her sound old. "Ino isn't feeling well, Masashi," Naruto pointed out. "Oh," was all the redhead mumbled until he saw a bit of orange stick out from behind Ino. Masashi grinned. "Found you, Minato." Minato moaned and stepped away from his hiding place. "Man." Minato and Masashi disappeared outside again. Ino turned to face Sasuke. "Who?" she breathed. "Karen," Sasuke replied, knowing what she wanted to ask. "Karen is Masashi's mother." Ino found herself sighing in relief. She may be married to Naruto, and before this all happened she was probably in love with him, but it would still hurt her if Sasuke ended up with Sakura. So Karen married Sasuke. "Wait a minute, Karen? Who is that?" Ino asked herself. Sasuke must have noticed her distress, because he chuckled darkly. "You won't remember her if you are from the past like you say," Sasuke pointed out. "You only met her later." "Oh," Ino mumbled. That made sense. Naruto cleared his throat. "So, Sasuke, will you keep this a secret?" Sasuke glared at his best friend. "What do you take me for, an idiot? I know what S-class means. My lips are sealed. However, I do think telling Karen is a good idea." "Why?" Ino asked before Naruto could. Sasuke smirked. "Simple, you're best friends, it would make sense if you told her. Besides, she can perhaps take a look at your chakra." Naruto clapped his hands together. "That's a great idea. Perhaps Ino's chakra might give us a clue." "Sasuke, you're a genius." Sasuke rolled his eyes. "Shucks, dub, just doing my job." Ino had to suppress the giggles that wanted to escape her. After breakfast and a nice long shower, Ino was dragged out of the house by a very enthusiastic Minato, a passive-looking Kaguya and a ever-grinning Naruto. As they walked through the streets of Konoha, Ino made mental notes of the things that were the same and the things that have changed. Along the way, they were greeted by several citizens. Naruto greeted everyone in return with a huge smile. Ino was shocked. Everyone loved him. It was so surreal. They finally reached a large house on the opposite side of town. Ino glanced around her curiously. It wasn't the Uchiha compound. Why was Sasuke living in a normal civilian home? Naruto lifted his arm to knock on the door, but the door opened before he got a chance. A woman stood in the doorway with long red hair wearing a very tight black shirt and a purple tank top. She grimaced when she spotted Naruto's shocked expression, his arm still in the air of his attempted knock. "Honestly, Naruto," the woman grumbled, "I can sense you a mile away." Naruto returned his arm to his side and rolled his eyes. "Of course, I knew that. I was just testing you." Judging from the woman's appearance, Ino gathered she was Karen, Sasuke's wife, and Masashi's mother. Karen's gaze shifted from Naruto to Ino. Their eyes met briefly and then Karen scrunched her nose. Ino felt self-conscious as the woman gave her an odd look. "Was something wrong?" "Is it me," Karen stated, "or is your chakra disrupted?" Naruto quirked an eyebrow in interest and glanced at Ino then back at Karen. "Disrupted, what do you mean?" Naruto asked. "Like she's under a genjutsu," Karen pointed out. Naruto narrowed his eyes, then glanced at his children too who seemed interested in the conversation. Kaguya was staring at her mother. Naruto could see her confusion. Minato cocked his head to the side. "What's a genjutsu, Papa?" Minato asked. "Kaguya, take your brother and go play with Masashi and Itachi." Naruto ignored his son's question. Us adults need to discuss some serious business. Kaguya wasn't happy, she didn't like being left in the dark, but complied to her father's order. Alright. Come on, Minato. Kaguya grabbed her brother's hand and dragged him inside. He moaned and questioned his sister repeatedly what a genjutsu was, but his questions were ignored until the children were out of sight. Can we come in? Naruto asked Karen. She nodded and stepped aside, allowing space for the two blondes to enter. Karen led them to what seemed to be the dining room. She proceeded to the kitchen that was connected to the dining area and started to prepare tea. Naruto and Ino made themselves comfortable by the table. Ino noticed a few odd things she never expected to see in Sasuke's home, ever. The first was a high chair. There was clearly a baby in the household, or it was just for decoration. Ino highly doubted that Sasuke would use a high chair as decoration though. Another thing she spotted was a large painting of their family on the wall. Ino stared at it in awe. Her previous observation of the high chair being used for a baby was proved by the infant that Karen held in the painting. She knew the painting was done recently, for Masashi looked the same as he does now. Ino also noticed another boy, around Minato's age, standing next to Masashi in front of their father. Ino smiled. It was a beautiful painting. Karen served tea and sat down. Sasuke explained to me that you have something to tell me, Karen pointed out. I'm listening. Ino glanced at Naruto pleadingly, who explained everything that has occurred to Karen. Karen listened without saying a word. After warning her that it was a S-class secret, Naruto sipped on his tea. Karen appeared to be in deep thought. Sense anything? Sasuke asked as he appeared in the doorway, a small bundle in his arms. Karen glanced at him. Her eyebrow twitched. She awake again? Karen asked, she has your energy, Sasuke. Sasuke shrugged and handed the bundle to Karen and sat down beside her. The bundle appeared to be the infant from the painting. Ino smiled as she watched Karen stroke the baby's dark hair. The baby's eyes were wide open and staring intently at the guests. What's her name? Ino asked. Mikoto, Sasuke answered. Ino froze. She knew that name. It was Sasuke's mother's name. Ino glanced at him and couldn't ignore the pride that seemed to soar around him. He was a proud father. Ino smiled. It was amazing how much things have changed. Back to the subject, Karen interrupted. To answer your question, Sasuke, yes, I do sense something. Sasuke seemed interested in his wife's revelation. Oh. Her chakra is disrupted, Karen pointed out, like she's under a genjutsu. Sasuke quirked an eyebrow, then turned to face Ino. Ino gulped when she noticed his eyes were no longer onyx black, but deep red instead. The Sharingan. Amazingly, this was the first time she has ever seen it up close like this. You're right, Sasuke agreed as he deactivated his Sharingan and wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders. Her chakra system is completely out of sync. It's amazing she's even conscious. Silence. Ino shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The silence was awkward. They were all in deep thought, debating and questioning the situation. Naruto could feel his heart racing in his chest. Questions zoomed through his mind as he tried to decipher the mystery behind Ino's disrupted chakra system. He was worried. What did it all entail? What was the outcome? The awkward silence faded when a little boy with dark hair ran into the room with tears rolling down his cheeks. He latched himself to Sasuke's arm and pulled himself into the Uchiha's lap. Sasuke furrowed his brows. Ino recognized him as the younger boy from the painting. What did Masashi do this time? Sasuke asked. The boy sniffled, Masashi good boy. Karen snorted, sometimes I wonder if he has Madara's genes in there somewhere, or something. Sasuke glared at her, then patted the boy's head, alright, Masashi is a good boy. Did Minato do something? No. The boy objected, Minato good boy. Uncle Sui not good boy. Karen snapped at that and stood up. Everyone's gaze landed on her. With her eyebrow twitching, she clenched her fists and inhaled a deep breath. Suijutsu. Karen yelled. Here we go again, Sasuke and Naruto muttered in unison. Ino was completely confused. After a few minutes of silence there was oh, shit from outside, followed by splashing and a loud crack. Karen was fuming and stomped out of the room. Is this normal? Ino asked wearyingly as she heard Karen yelling outside while someone else, a man, was trying to defend himself. Yes, Sasuke stated, it occurs on a daily basis. Sometimes I wonder why I even allow the idiot to live here. He's always trying to find a way to get under Karen's skin. Drives us all insane. Ino was still confused. Who was Suijutsu? The little boy on Sasuke's lap stopped sniffling and was now staring intently at Ino. He looked an awful lot like Sasuke, but had his mother's lips, nose, and eyebrows. His hair hung loose on his shoulders. Itachi, it's rude to stare, Sasuke pointed out. The boy blushed and looked away. Karen finally returned and sat down, her anger seemed to have faded. Itachi, you can go swim in your plastic pool again. I kicked Suijutsu to the moon. Is there water on moon? Itachi asked. Karen snickered, I sure hope not. That idiot deserves to die of dehydration. Let me guess, Naruto pointed out, Suijutsu dominated the plastic pool again. Karen nodded, kicked the kids out and took the thing for himself. He also kept refilling the thing with the hose. Now the bill will be expensive again. Stupid idiot. Naruto chuckled. Enough about plastic pools, Karen sighed, what will become of Ino? I don't know, Naruto sighed, I'll have Shikamaru look into it. I might also request of Gaara to check the archives in Suna, maybe they have data on a jutsu that can do this. Meanwhile, I'll go through the archives here. Until then, all we can do is sit tight. Karen nodded in agreement, we'll help as much as possible. If necessary, you can bring her here anytime. And if she starts showing strange symptoms or behavior, send for Sasuke immediately. Will do, Naruto stated as he stood up. Karen and Sasuke led the two outside and bid their farewells. Kaguya decided to stay for training and Minato wanted to play with Itachi, so Naruto and Ino headed home alone. As they walked back, Ino found herself feeling like she was floating in space. Chapter 5, Impacts. Her eyes fluttered open exactly 4 seconds before her alarm clock shrilled loudly through the large bedroom. Ino sighed and silenced the screaming contraption and turned onto her side. She stared at the empty space beside her. Naruto used to sleep here. The mere thought of it made her shiver. Mama! Minato shrieked happily as he burst into the room and jumped on his mother's bed and crawled under the blankets. Ino giggled as he little boy wriggled around and made himself comfortable against her. His small arms wrapped around her. Ino smiled and patted the boy's back. He was the most beautiful thing she has ever seen and it pained her that she basically didn't know him at all. Ino noticed Kaguya standing in the doorway, watching them with her eyes narrowed. Ino could feel panic rise within her. Kaguya was already suspicious, and after the family visited Sasuke, the teenager has been watching Ino closely. It frightened her to think that her daughter might know the truth. What would it lead to? Good morning, Kaguya, Ino decided to greet her daughter calmly. Kaguya was snapped from her serious daze and her gaze shifted to her mother's eyes. Ino felt her heart tug inside her ribcage. Kaguya and Minato inherited Naruto's beautiful deep blue eyes. It was a trait Ino found attractive in him, despite the fact that she was mostly oblivious to him when she was younger. Morning, Kaguya returned the greeting. Minato poked his head out from under the covers with a grin and waved at his sister. Sis, come sleep with us. He smiled. Kaguya shook her head and turned to leave. Ino felt her heart sink. She wanted to spend time with Kaguya. She wanted to get to know her. Sasuke-sensei will punish me if I'm late, Kaguya stated passively. Ino made a mental note to lecture Sasuke on making her daughter speak like him. Kaguya sounded so aloof and distant. It was maddening. What kind of punishment? Ino asked, her curiosity piqued. I don't know, Kaguya shrugged, he'll probably use Amaterasu on me, or Tsukuyomi. You never know. Ino's eyebrow twitched, Amaterasu? Tsukuyomi? What kind of teacher is he? Is he trying to kill you? I was joking. Kaguya laughed as she turned around again to face her mother. Ino stared shocked at the laughing Kaguya. The girl had dimples. It was adorable. Ino felt pride overwhelm her. That was her daughter. Her beautiful daughter. Oh, Ino breathed in relief. So, what does he really do? Kaguya straightened. The worst would be to do his laundry. I don't want to gossip, but apparently Sasuke-sensei's socks really stink. Ino couldn't help but burst into fits of laughter. Minato didn't understand, but laughed because his mother was laughing. Kaguya smiled as she watched her mother laugh. For some reason her mother suddenly seemed normal again. For the past few days, Kaguya noticed a change in her mother. There was something missing. Alright, Ino finally calmed down. Go meet your sensei and his stinky socks. Kaguya grinned and then left. Ino turned to face Minato and stroked his blonde hair. And what about you? She asked. I want to make mince pies. Ino agreed without even thinking twice. Naruto sighed as he opened the wooden cabinet and neatly placed 2 new incense sticks in place of the previously burned ones. After lighting the incense he lifted a small vase with flowers and placed it next to the photograph of his parents. With a smile on his lips and tears threatening to spill from his eyes he watched the two smiling. What am I supposed to do? Naruto asked. Of course, he did not receive a reply. Naruto sighed in frustration. What could he do? His wife did not know of their marriage at all. She believes that she never even committed herself to a romantic relationship with him. Although he acted like he accepted it, like he was alright with it, he couldn't bear it. He couldn't bear to look at her and know he can't hold her anymore. He can't tell her how beautiful she was anymore, look in her eyes and kiss her. She was like a blessing that has slipped right through his fingers. Naruto. He heard behind him. He jumped and spun around. Ino stood in the doorway, wearing her baby blue pajamas, the ones he brought her for Mother's Day, watching him curiously. Yes. He responded. Ino stepped inside and rubbed her arms while shivering. It was chilly and the thin cotton wasn't doing much for heat. What are you doing? Ino asked as she sniffed the air. Incense. Naruto glanced at the photograph of his parents and smiled. Sorry, does it bother you? No, not at all, Ino stated as she sat down beside him. Silence enveloped the two. Naruto was staring at his hands that rested in his lap and Ino was staring at the photograph before her. She recognized the man, it was the 4th Hokage. But the woman with long red hair, violet eyes, and a bulge in her stomach she did not know. Ino frowned as she stared at the photo. She glanced at Naruto and then back at the photo. And then it dawned on her. Why did she never realize? Why did she never see the resemblance? Why hasn't anyone noticed over the years? Ino's eyes widened as she turned to face Naruto. You're the 4th son. Ino gasped. Naruto glanced at her and nodded slowly. Ino gasped again, and this woman, she's your mother. Another nod. Still shocked, Ino turned to glance at the photo again. The resemblance was there. Naruto had traits from both his mother and father. They died. Naruto trailed off, on the day I was born. Ino felt her heart shatter for him. He had told her that they celebrated his birthday 2 weeks ago. That means they had remembered his parents on the same day. How did Naruto do it? How did he remain so cheerful despite growing up without the love of his parents? Ino knew that she would never be able to survive without her parents. It made her see the blonde in a new light. He really wasn't the idiot she had always believed him to be. I'm sorry, Ino muttered, I'm sorry. Don't be, Naruto whispered. Silence enveloped again. Naruto. Ino whispered after a while. How did we start dating? Ino asked. Her fists were clenched and her cheeks were red. It was strange behavior for her, but she knew it was awkward conversation. Well, Naruto breathed, we probably officially started dating after the war. War? Ino asked, her eyes wide. Naruto cursed at himself mentally. She didn't know about the 4th Ninja War. Of course she didn't. Naruto sighed. Was it even wise to tell her this? It wouldn't impact the future, would it? There were always consequences in time-traveling fiction, so the real deal probably had consequences too, right? It's a long story, Naruto stated. To sum it up, The fourth great ninja war was the five nations pitted against the Akatsuki. Naruto knew he was taking a huge risk, but it was too late to turn back now. "Oh," Ino stated, "we officially started dating afterward." Naruto nodded. "We became close friends before then. We often had ramen eating contests. And you liked teaching me about flowers. But we never thought of romance. I was still attached to Sakura-chan back then." Ino listened intently. "They often had ramen eating contests? Looks like that one single offer before this all happened led her to her future husband. Wow. You were still attached to Sakura? When did you get over her?" Ino asked. Naruto flinched and looked down ashamed. "It took me a while, but thanks to you the pain was healed." "Pain?" Ino asked. "Did Sakura hurt him?" Ino felt her blood boil. If that rosette even dared to hurt Naruto, she would never hear the end of it. "Yes," Naruto whispered, "after her death." It was like a huge pile of rocks hit her in that instant. Ino froze. The word death echoed through her like a spiraling cloud. Sakura was dead. Haruno Sakura, her childhood friend and her rival, was dead. Dead? Ino echoed. She couldn't believe it. It couldn't be true. It just couldn't be true. "She's not the only one," Naruto pointed out. "There were many causalities in the war. After Sakura was struck down, it hit us all. The person affected the most was Lee." Ino pursed her lips into a thin line. Lee loved Sakura. Ino knew that much. "I'm sorry," Ino stuttered, "I am causing you so much trouble, making you remember such a thing. I'm sorry." Naruto sighed. He couldn't stand to watch her apologize like this. Yes, he was angry. Yes, he was upset. He wanted to scream and curse the bastard who did this to Ino. Who made her travel through time. But he could never direct that anger towards her. No matter how much it pained him to watch her without being allowed to touch her, he could never be angry at her. Because he loved her more than anything else in this world. On a day like this, Rock Lee was always seen at one place. He would drop his duties as a ninja, as a teacher, as a father and as a husband, and approach the lonely and gloomy graveyard with a small smile on his face. With him, he always carried flowers. Beautiful, rich flowers that he would place on her grave. Lee came to a halt before Haruno Sakura's grave and knelt on the wet grass to place the flowers next to the tombstone. The small smile still played on his lips as he remembered the good old days he spent with her and all their friends. She might be dead, but that didn't mean he moped around. He remembered the good things and the bad things. He remembered the time when she was alive. Lee stood up and buried his hands in his pockets. He was a 38-year-old man, married to the most beautiful woman and had a beautiful son. There was nothing more he could ask for. Deep down, he knew that Sakura would be happy that he found happiness, even if it was without her. "Lee!" came a female voice from behind him. He turned around, came face to face with the smiling face of Tenten. "Tenten, my youthful wife," Lee grinned, "what brings you here?" Tenten rolled her eyes. "For your information, your youthful son is currently sprinting around the village border. Mind explaining?" Lee laughed nervously. "What can I say? He has the burning passion of youth." Chapter 6, The Bamboo Cutter. As a child, Kaguya enjoyed the story of the bamboo cutter. It was a beautiful tale that etched into her mind ever since her mother told her that Kaguya Hime was her namesake. Kaguya often asked her mother to share the story at the dining table, or when she went to bed, but now as 13-year-old Kaguya sat there, watching her mother silently eating without even glancing at her children, Kaguya could feel her throat dry. Her mother has been acting strange lately. Ever since that day where her mother claimed she was dizzy, Kaguya knew something was wrong. Even dizziness wouldn't stop Ino from recognizing her children. Kaguya knew that much. Her mother was hiding something and the teenager was determined to find out what. Naruto didn't pay attention during dinner. His mind was blank, his eyes focused on his plate of food. He aimlessly played around with his fork, while his children and wife remained just as silent as he did. It was awkward. Very awkward. The bubbly enjoyment the family used to share was gone. "Are you working tomorrow, Dad?" Kaguya finally broke the silence. Naruto looked up at his daughter. Yes, I'll probably be late. Oh, Kaguya muttered, disappointed. She was hoping she could train with him and perhaps beat out the information of her mother out of him. She wanted to know the truth. She was already old enough to know and handle the truth. What about you, Mom? Ino looked up, alarmed that she being spoken to. Oh, Ino shot Naruto a pleading gaze. He cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. Your mother will be busy tomorrow too. Kaguya sighed and mumbled a too bad under her breath. Minato started humming a playful tune while munching on his chicken. His blue eyes were sparkling. It made Ino smile as she watched him bob his head from side to side. After dinner, Ino played a card game with the children while Naruto did the dishes. Ino did offer to do it, but the Hokage insisted on doing it by himself. Ino had no choice but to comply to his wishes. Minato then dragged her off to play. Mama, Minato grinned from ear to ear as he held up a card into Ino's face. She blinked and then smiled when he realized he had no idea how to play card games at all. Kaguya, will you play with your brother? Ino asked. The teenager merely grunted, but took her brother's cards from his small hands and shuffled through them. She then nodded. While Ino scanned through her cards, she noticed the odd looks her daughter was giving her. It bothered her. She didn't want the children to discover that she wasn't well, the mother they knew. She was still their mother, but the younger version. Naruto appeared in the doorway. He was drying his hands with a towel and watching the children curiously as they awaited their mother to make a move. Naruto glanced at the clock on the wall, and noticed that it was getting late. Minato, Naruto called, time for your bath. Kaguya, take care of him, all right. Minato wailed since they didn't get to play, but one stern glance from his father and the boy was silenced. He allowed his sister to take his hand and lead him upstairs, leaving the two adults by themselves in the living room. Ino gathered the cards and packed them away, then she stood up and mustered a weak smile as she passed Naruto. She was stopped dead in her tracks when his hand grabbed her wrist. Where are you going, Ino? Naruto asked darkly. Ino felt a shiver run down her spine. I was going to help with Minato's bath. Ino hesitantly half-stated, half-asked. She glanced over her shoulder and noticed that Naruto was watching her. She gulped. Kaguya is a big girl, Naruto pointed out, she'll be fine by herself. Ino felt her cheeks burn. I know, is it wrong of me to want to spend time with my children? Naruto's eyes widened and he let go of her wrist. He stepped back and lowered his head, effectively hiding his eyes behind his blonde bangs. Ino noticed him trembling. Naruto. Ino hesitantly reached out to him, but he slapped her hand away. I'm fine, he exclaimed, refusing to meet her eyes. You're right, it's fine to spend time with them. Ino quirked an eyebrow and was about to open her mouth to say something, but she was cut off when Naruto turned around and sat down on the couch. He grabbed a scroll and opened it. And just like that he ended the conversation. Ino felt her heart tighten in her chest as she stared at the back of his head. She slowly turned around and headed upstairs, her mind constantly flicking back to Naruto. Sleep refused to come. Ino lay awake in the large bed in the main bedroom, her mind reeling. She could hear Minato mumble in his sleep from across the hallway, she could hear the tap drip in the bathroom, she could hear Naruto's soft snore coming from the guest bedroom. She was aware of every noise. Naruto. The name stuck in her mind like glue. His behavior earlier frightened her, but at the same time she understood. It was strange, but she understood. It was painful for him. She was his wife, but yet she wasn't. Of course it was hurting him. Ino silently wondered what Naruto wanted from her earlier. He looked so hurt. Like he was in pain. Ino clenched her fists. She hated seeing him like that. So confused, so lost, and filled with so much pain. She wanted to see him happy, wearing that large goofy grin of his. She missed it. She couldn't believe she missed it. With a sigh, Ino got out of bed and approached the window. She pulled open the curtains, allowing the moon's light to cascade on her skin. She silently stared at Konohagakure. Somehow, over the years the village has become more beautiful at night. Ino stared at her home village in awe. It wasn't the same anymore. She could remember the Konoha from her days as a teenager clearly, but this new Konoha was so different. She wanted to explore it. She wanted to find the secret alleys and underground pathways, yet she couldn't, for now she was an adult. She had the responsibility as a wife and a mother. Ino clutched onto the curtain fabric. She felt like such a child, stuck in the body of a fully matured woman. Kaguya couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, but sleep never came. It was unusual for the blonde teenager to be sleep-deprived. Sleep was like second nature to her. She slept like the dead. She inherited that trait from her father. So why couldn't she sleep today? Why was her eyes refusing to close? With a disapproved snort, the teenager got out of bed and stretched her arms above her head. She pulled her blonde hair into a messy bun and quickly left her room. It felt like she was suffocating. Kaguya slipped past her brother's room and headed for the stairs, only to come to a halt beside the guest bedroom. Her eyes widened, her blood ran cold in her veins. Kaguya stared in shock, her lips trembling. Further, in the bed of the guest room lay her father, fast asleep and snoring. He was alone. He was all alone and curled up into a ball. Kaguya knew that pose. He was lonely. Her father was suffering. Whenever it was his birthday, or when her mother was on a mission, he often unconsciously curled up like that. To say she was shocked was an understatement. Why was her father sleeping alone? Why wasn't he in his own bedroom? The questions all had to somehow have an answer. Kaguya turned around and headed for the main bedroom. Her mother was awake. Kaguya stopped in the doorway when she spotted her mother. Ino was standing by the window, her short blonde hair clung to her face, the moon's light danced on her skin. Kaguya couldn't help but notice her mother's beauty. Why was her mother alone? Why was her father alone? They weren't fighting, were they? No, they couldn't be fighting. They haven't been acting angered towards each other, so that couldn't possibly be the reason. Mother! Kaguya called. Ino spun around, her blue eyes wide. Oh, Ino breathed, Kaguya, it's you. Why are you alone, Mama? Kaguya asked. Ino looked panicked. She shifted her gaze away from her mother, she bit her bottom lip. Kaguya could see her mother trembling. Kaguya could see that this pained her mother, that this confused her. So she changed the subject. Will you tell me the story of the bamboo cutter, Mama? Ino was surprised, but soon her surprise melted away into a warm smile. Chapter 7, The Heiress. Ino was awoken by the sun's rays that hit her face. She groaned and pulled the blankets over her head, trying to shut the sun away. Soon she could no longer breathe properly, so she sat up and cursed silently at the sun. She was tired. So tired. Knowing that she can't stay in bed all day, Ino removed herself from her warm bed and shuffled to the bathroom, where she stripped herself naked and climbed into the shower. She drowned herself in hot water, allowing the droplets to gently caress her skin as she stood there in silence. She could hear Minato laughing outside. After her shower, Ino dried herself off and pulled on a purple kimono she found in her walk-in closet. For some reason, the kimono reminded her of her mother. Mother. The word clung to her like a magnet. How was her mother? If she could recall, she clearly spent time with her mother, since Naruto spoke of helping her mother the first time she awoke as her 37-year-old self. It had to be her mother, for Uzumaki Kushina was dead. Ino made a mental note to visit her family as soon as possible. Perhaps her father knew about time traveling and being stuck in your future self. Perhaps this wasn't time traveling. Perhaps this was something like a mind transfer. Ino perked up. Oh, the possibilities. If her father knew something, perhaps she could then go home. Excited, Ino dashed down the stairs, grabbed a piece of bread and then left the house. She knew that the children weren't alone, she could sense the presence of someone else, so she believed they were in good hands to be left alone for a while. Ino hoped her house was still where it used to be. Her family home no longer stood on the same spot, but it was close enough. She instantly recognized it when the sign of the shop caught her eye. She smiled as she stared at the building before her. Ino quickly slipped inside. She was greeted by buckets filled with flowers. The sweet aromas danced around her as she closed her eyes. How she has missed the fresh scent of flowers. It felt like such a long time since she has worked with flowers, even though in reality it has only been a few days. The door opened behind her, the bell ringing loudly throughout the shop. Ino opened her eyes and turned around. She came face to face with a pair of lavender-tinted eyes. Ino felt her blood run cold and a shiver run down her spine as she stared at the person before her. It was a woman. Her dark hair was curled elaborately on top her head into a fancy bun, hairpins and ornaments poked out from the bun. Her lips were shaded a ruby red and she had on a beautiful red and golden kimono. Ino unconsciously tightened her fists. Ino? The woman asked, her eyes shining brightly. Hinata. Was all Ino could muster. Hinata smiled warmly. Ino couldn't believe that this mature, beautiful woman before her was Hinata. Hinata, the shy little girl who always withdrew herself, she looked like a queen. A regal queen who knew she had power. What on earth happened to the shy Hinata? So lovely to see you, Hinata smiled as she bowed. Yeah, Ino trailed off, you look amazing. Hinata merely smiled, a small and faint blush was present on her cheeks but she did not stutter or react like she would have in the past. Thank you, you look rather amazing yourself. So, what brings you here? Ino asked, her eyes still wide from the shock. I have come to pay for the flowers my family ordered, Hinata stated. I told you I would be come by today, didn't I? Ino blinked. You did. Yes, Hinata continued, confusion apparent on her face, when you were here the other day, remember? The fact was, Ino didn't remember. Her future self would have remembered, but she of course, being from the past, did not. Ino bit her bottom lip. This was something she was going to encounter from now on when she meets with old friends. Somehow it saddened her. Everyone she knew here was aware of so many things about herself, things that she was not aware of at all. I'm sorry, Ino sighed, I haven't been very well the past few days, I guess it slipped my mind. Trouble in paradise? Hinata asked. Ino looked taken aback. Hinata was smiling evilly at Ino. It was a creepy smile, not a smile you would expect from a shy girl like Hinata. Ino gulped, you can say that. Did you have a fight with Naruto? Hinata asked. Ino was surprised. Hinata was prepared to talk about her relationship with Naruto? Everyone knew that Hinata was in love with Naruto. Wouldn't she have become angry or jealous when Ino supposedly married Naruto? Not really, Ino stated, it's complicated. Hinata merely nodded. She did not press the matter any further. Ino was grateful for that. She relaxed and allowed her eyes to wander down to Hinata's stomach. She blinked, then her eyes widened. You're expecting? Ino asked as she looked back up. Hinata's eyes brightened and she smiled warmly. Yes. Hinata exclaimed excitedly, no one seems to notice. It's this stupid kimono's fault. They hide all my curves. They just mistake the small bump for fat. Ino laughed, congratulations. How far along are you? 28 weeks. The two women were interrupted when someone appeared from the back of the store. An elderly woman with faded red hair and blue eyes entered the room, carrying a basket with purple flowers. She was dressed in a traditional purple kimono with a green apron over it. Ino's eyes lit up when she saw her. Mama! Ino exclaimed. Even though her mother was much older than she remembered, she recognized her instantly. The woman seemed surprised to see Ino, but she smiled nonetheless. Hello dear, what brings you here? Mrs. Yamanaka asked. Ino leaped into her mother's arms, causing the elderly woman to drop the basket with flowers in surprise. Ino buried her face in her mother's shoulder and silently cried. Mrs. Yamanaka noticed her daughter's trembling and locked her arms around her daughter's waist. There, Mrs. Yamanaka whispered, I'm here. I'm sorry, Mama, Ino sobbed, I just feel so alone. Mrs. Yamanaka was confused, but she decided not to push Ino. Instead she patted her daughter's back until she calmed down. Hinata watched the scene silently, a smile on her face, but her eyes solemn. Ino pulled away from her mother and wiped her eyes, then smiled. Ino quickly got down on her knees and gathered the flowers her mother dropped. Meanwhile, Mrs. Yamanaka greeted Hinata and welcomed her. Ino placed the now refilled basket back on the counter and glanced at how formally her mother addressed Hinata. "When will you require the order to be delivered?" Mrs. Yamanaka asked as she opened her notebook. "Saturday afternoon," Hinata replied, "preferably at 4. I don't want the delivery and arrival happening at the same time. It will make the place a madhouse." Mrs. Yamanaka laughed, Of course, of course. How long will he be staying this time?" Hinata blushed a deep crimson at Mrs. Yamanaka's words. Ino found herself extremely curious as to what her mother was referring to. I don't know," Hinata answered. Ino smirked. "Here returns the Hinata stutter." Mrs. Yamanaka chuckled, "I'm just playing with you, Hyuga-sama. No need to get nervous." Hinata's blush darkened, but she quickly regained her composure and straightened herself. They continued to discuss delivery options and instructions. Ino found herself wandering around the shop, occasionally stopping to sniff flowers. "Oi, Hinata-sama, how long are you going to take?" a male voice asked, annoyed as the door opened and bell chimered. Ino looked up from where she was kneeling. In the doorway stood a young, tall man with long dark hair and lavender-tinted eyes. "Neji?" Ino found herself asking, but when the man turned to look at her, she realized that he might have looked like Neji, but he wasn't Neji at all. Hinata turned around to face the young man and shook her head. "Masahiro," Hinata tooted, "what have I told you about calling me Hinata-sama?" Masahiro sighed, "But mother, we're in public." Ino gawked wide eyes at the man. Did he just call her mother? Of course, Ino expected Hinata to have other children other than the one she was currently carrying, but she did not expect the other child to be so old. He looked at least 17, maybe even older. Ino could just not piece together the possibility of Hinata having a child so early. "Good day, Masahiro," Mrs. Yamanaka smiled, "in the market for some flowers today." Masahiro blushed, "Stop it, old woman. You know I don't have feelings for Akemi." "Geez." Mrs. Yamanaka laughed, "I'm just teasing you. Don't you think it's sexy though? The tale of a romance between the daughter of a teacher and the son of the teacher's student." Hinata chuckled, "I must agree, it does have a nice ring to it." "See?" Mrs. Yamanaka asked, "Even your mother agrees." Masahiro's eyebrow twitched, "Whatever." And just like that, the young man was out of the shop. Ino stood up, her eyes still wide from the shock of having met Hinata's son. "Well, he is clearly annoyed," Mrs. Yamanaka chuckled, "I think you should go, Hyuga-sama." Hinata nodded in agreement, "Yes, thank you for your assistance. I shall see you at the banquet." "That you shall," Mrs. Yamanaka nodded. Hinata bowed and then left, looking just as regal from behind. Ino was amazed just how much Hinata has changed. Mrs. Yamanaka turned to face Ino, "So what brings you here?" Chapter 8, Mother and Father. "So, what brings you here?" Mrs. Yamanaka asked. Ino opened her mouth to spill everything to her mother, to tell her all the hardships she has been encountering since her awakening, but somehow she had a feeling she shouldn't. Ino quickly caught her words and merely smiled. "I'm homesick, that's all," Ino whispered. Mrs. Yamanaka smiled and pulled her daughter in an embrace. Ino felt content in her mother's warm arms. She sighed and closed her eyes, finally it felt like she was home. Not that she didn't feel at home with Naruto and the children, but they were foreign to her. They were not the family she had spent all her life with, yet. "It's alright, Mrs. Yamanaka cooed, I'm sure you'll work it out." Ino giggled, "I didn't have a fight with Naruto." "Is that so?" "I didn't think so," Mrs. Yamanaka laughed, "you two fight over the most ridiculous things constantly. It's never something that would drive you out of the house, though." Ino furrowed her brows. She constantly fought with Naruto? The mere thought made her want to shiver. She couldn't imagine having arguments with him. Naruto always seemed like the type to go along with whatever the girl says. Looks like he has gained some independence over the years, which was a very good thing. Mrs. Yamanaka pulled away from her daughter and patted her shoulders, "How about some tea?" Ino nodded and the two disappeared through the door that led to the Yamanaka family home. Mrs. Yamanaka set up the kettle, while Ino scanned her surroundings. The inside of the house has changed drastically. Most of the furniture has been replaced and the layout of the house seemed different too. Ino smiled when she found a small portrait photo of her family. Minato is so small here. Ino ran her fingers over the glass that protected the photo. Minato was a mere infant in the photo, still wrapped in blankets, resting in his mother's arms. Kaguya was younger too, but she had that same smile she carried now. Mrs. Yamanaka glanced at Ino over her shoulder and nodded. That was taken 2 weeks after he was born, remember? Just look at Naruto's face, he is the most idiotic, yet proud father in the world. Ino laughed. Sure enough, Naruto was beaming like a lunatic in the photo. Ino returned the photo to its place and sat down by the dining table. Mrs. Yamanaka poured their tea and handed a cup to Ino, who took it gratefully. Mrs. Yamanaka sat down next to her daughter. Do you have a dress yet? Mrs. Yamanaka asked. Ino looked up, bewildered. Dress? Ino asked. Mrs. Yamanaka frowned. For the Hyuga banquet. You are organizing it with Hyuga-sama, remember? Ino laughed nervously. This was the first she heard of it, of course. Ino made a mental note to ask Naruto about it later so that she wouldn't be stuck in a situation like this again. I don't have a dress, Ino stated, but she added mentally, I think. Mrs. Yamanaka smiled and patted her daughter's arm. You'll find the right dress. You always do. Ino merely smiled and quickly took a sip of tea to break the conversation. Silence enveloped the kitchen as the two women sipped their tea. The front door opened and a tall figure stepped inside, dressed in a navy uniform and a flak jacket. Ino's face lit up when she saw the person's blonde ponytail. Inoichi blinked when his eyes landed on his daughter. She waved at him awkwardly, causing him to smile and kiss her forehead. Inoichi then proceeded to greet his wife, then poured himself a cup of tea and joined the two girls he loved the most at the dining table. What did Naruto say? Mrs. Yamanaka finally asked. Inoichi grunted, the usual. I swear he's out to hunt me, or something. Mrs. Yamanaka snorted, you're just paranoid because he's Minato's son. Inoichi pouted, causing Ino to giggle. Her parents turned to face her and smiled. They loved seeing their daughter happy, but despite her laughs, they could tell that she wasn't 100% there. Her eyes were somewhat different, and that worried them. So, Inoichi interrupted Ino's giggles, have you been interrupting your mother's work all day? Ino shook her head, no, we're just taking a break. Actually, I wanted to talk to you. Inoichi quirked an eyebrow, oh. Ino inhaled deeply. Should she tell them? Naruto was quite stern when it came to her condition. They did all agree to keep it a secret until they could figure out what was happening to her, but this was her parents. She couldn't keep something so big away from them. She never could before, so naturally she can't right now. Ino trailed off, feeling intimidated by her parents' stares. It's about my condition. Are you sick? Mrs. Yamanaka asked, worried. Ino shook her head. Pregnant. Ino shook her head again. Inoichi appeared to be in deep thought. Is this regarding what Naruto was babbling about? Ino frowned. What did he tell you? That you dodged time or something, Inoichi stated, rolling his eyes. I thought he was playing me, much like his parents always did when they were still alive. Mrs. Yamanaka laughed. Those were the days. Naruto is quite the energetic Hokage. It's refreshing, is it not? Inoichi nodded in agreement. Naruto was right, Ino stated, kind of. Her parents stared at her. Ino gulped and tried to piece everything together so that she could properly explain it to them. Finally she spoke. Minato. The teacher called out. A little boy with blonde hair and eyes as blue as the sky looked up from where he was playing in a sandpit at the woman who he called teacher during the day. She was a petite woman who always dressed modestly and wore a yellow apron. Home. Minato mumbled when he spotted his sister standing beside the teacher, her arms crossed and her brows knitted together. He could tell she was not in a good mood. That meant no candy on the way home. Itachi glanced at his friend, his onyx eyes wide in curiosity. Your sister is here. The teacher continued to call. Minato sighed and stood up, his blonde hair ruffled in the wind. He wiped his dirty hands on his shorts and then skipped to the lockers where he grabbed his backpack and then approached his sister. He looked up at her and smiled widely. Kaguya gazed at him, then her frown disappeared and she returned the smile. He took his sister's hand, waved goodbye to Itachi and his teacher and then allowed his sister to lead him out of the school. Minato looked up at his sister as they walked home. "Where's Mama?" Kaguya furrowed her brows again. "She's busy, Minato. But she always picks me up." Minato objected. Kaguya sighed, memories of her parents sleeping in separate rooms flashing through her mind. "I know, Minato, I'm sorry. Can't I be her temporary replacement?" Minato pouted, but did not answer. Kaguya smiled at her brother sadly when she spotted his unhappy face. She hated seeing him like this, but what could she do? Kaguya pulled her fingers through her blonde hair and then spotted a familiar sign. She smiled. "How about we get some ramen?" Minato's face brightened. "Really?" Shikamaru didn't like smoking, but for the sake of stress he smoked. He popped a cigarette in his mouth and lit it and sat back, frustrated. He had searched endlessly for answers, but came up with nothing. Not one single entry has been entered into the Nara archives regarding time travel, which was expected, but still, he was annoyed. Now he will have to actually go through the village archives, which could take months. Life was incredibly troublesome. Shikamaru, Temari walked out into the garden, her blonde hair hanging down on her shoulders, wet from her shower. He looked up and waved. Temari rolled her eyes, poked his forehead and then sat down beside him. "Find anything?" Shikamaru let out a puff of smoke and sighed. "Nope. Nothing. I'll request access to the archives tomorrow. Hopefully there's something in there." Temari nodded. "I've received a letter from Gaara, but he hasn't found anything yet either." "Not surprising, it's only been a few days." Shikamaru agreed. "Yeah. Listen, Temari, you must not tell anyone about this." "I won't," Temari stated, "not even Kankuro knows." Shikamaru nodded. "Good." The two sat silently and watched the sunset. Shikamaru wrapped his arm around Temari's shoulder and pulled her closer to him. She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes and enjoying his warmth. "Temari," Shikamaru whispered. "I went over our finances this morning," Shikamaru continued in a whisper. "We have a stable amount of savings." Temari laced her fingers with Shikamaru's and smiled. "Really? And what are we going to do with that money?" "Oh, I don't know," Shikamaru snorted. "What do you want to do?" Temari chuckled. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. When Kaguya and Minato arrived home, things were awfully quiet and eerie. Naruto was sitting in the living room, his eyes fixated on a scroll. Before him stood a cold cup of coffee and several mint wrappers were scattered all over the floor. The room was dark, with only a oil lamp providing light for him to read. "Where's Mama?" Minato asked when he noticed his mother's absence. "I don't know, son," Naruto replied without looking up from his work. "Did you guys eat?" "Yes," Kaguya answered. Naruto nodded. He reached for his coffee and took a sip, pulled a face and abandoned the scroll and got up to make himself a new cup. He glanced at his daughter, who was staring at him with serious eyes, but he merely smiled and pushed past them. The front door opened and Ino stepped inside. The children turned to face her, their blue eyes curious and waiting. Ino pulled off her coat and placed it on the coat rack. She then proceeded to remove her shoes. She stretched her arms over her head. "Hello, Mama," Minato greeted. Ino smiled and motioned for him to come closer. He did as told and yelped when his mother pulled him into an embrace. Minato blinked at the sudden emotion he felt radiate from his mother and wrapped his little arms around her neck. Ino looked up into Kaguya's eyes, beckoning for her to come closer. Kaguya was wary, but eventually gave in and the three embraced each other. Ino was grateful for her children. Despite only knowing them for a few days, she loved them to bits. She could no longer imagine life without them. Naruto watched the scene from the kitchen doorway, his heart aching in a way it shouldn't be. After all, fathers should never be jealous of their children. Chapter 9, I am Uzumaki Ino. I am Uzumaki Ino. She jumped, her senses suddenly very alert. She could hear and smell so many different things. The bustling of everyday life moved around her. Ino stared dumbly at the wooden wall before her, her brows furrowed together. A sudden movement beside her caught her attention. A hand was shoved into her face. "Ino?" a familiar voice asked. Ino slowly turned to face the source of the hand and came face to face with eyes so blue, the sky could be put to shame. The first thing she noticed was that the person beside her was someone she knew very well. Her first reaction was to smile, but when she opened her eyes to give him another proper look, she noticed something was very wrong with him. Uzumaki Naruto gave the blonde next to him a very confused stare. "You challenged me to a ramen contest, yet you didn't even touch the ramen." Ino, still flabbergasted, quickly glanced at the large bowl of ramen before her. She then glanced back at Naruto. "How was the contest?" Teiuchi asked as he stepped back into the shop. Ino looked up at him, amazed by how young he looked. Teiuchi stared at her, then laughed. "You didn't even eat a thing. Too much for you." Ino opened her mouth to say something, but decided against it. She narrowed her eyes dangerously and concentrated on Naruto's chakra. Now, she wasn't Karen, but Ino did know a few things about chakra patterns, being a medic and all. Naruto's chakra was perfectly normal. Ino focused on Teiuchi. His chakra was weaker, but was normal. So this clearly was not a genjutsu. Worried, Ino jumped up, causing the two men to stare at her in surprise. "I have to go." And then she stormed out of the small stall as fast as her legs could carry her. When she came to a halt, Ino noticed that Konoha looked different. Not new or unrecognizable, but it somehow became its old self again. Ino found this very vexing. She glanced up at the Hokage monument. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. Ino gaped, her eyes wide. There were only 5 faces. Ino suddenly felt her stomach churn wildly. She spun around and quickly sprinted to a flower bed. After puking her guts out, Ino collapsed on the ground in a heap. She lifted her hand and looked at them. No wrinkles. No blemishes. Her skin was silky smooth, like she was a teenager again. She touched her hair and gasped as she ran her fingers through the long locks. She had long hair. How did she not notice? She had hair practically covering her eye. Ino then looked down at herself. She was once again wearing the purple outfit she had loved as a teenager. Suddenly, the realization hit her. She obviously wasn't physically 37 anymore. Someone used the 5 dimensions to heaven, and whoever did it, knew how to use mind transfer jutsu. Ino thought about approaching Tsunade, who was Hokage at this time, but decided against it. She was still unsure of the circumstances and did not want to bring danger to Konoha when it clearly isn't needed right now. So, she will just have to continue on as if nothing happened. Ino sighed in frustration. 16 all over again. How wonderful. Ino mentally sighed. How she wished she knew the date, then she would be more aware of what schedule her 16-year-old self had for the day. She was with Naruto at Ichiraku before, so could it be the start of their courtship? Ino found this very annoying, for now she's back to square one with him. How fantastic. Ino. A voice asked, causing the poor, old, woman to jump. She spun around, very alert, but relaxed when she met the lazy gaze of Shikamaru. Oh, Ino sighed, it's you. Don't scare me like that. Shikamaru quirked an eyebrow, right, sorry. Weren't you feeling sick earlier? Ino stared, what do you mean? At training, you said you were sick, so you went home, Shikamaru pointed out. Ino frowned. She certainly didn't feel sick now. Then again, she did puke her guts out earlier. Maybe it's gastro? Ino shrugged and pulled her fingers through her hair. She still could not get over the fact that her long hair was back. Well, Shikamaru sighed, don't come crying to me when you get worse. Troublesome woman. Ino smiled weakly, right, thanks. By the way, Shikamaru, what's the date? Shikamaru gave her an odd look, but answered anyway, it's July the 10th. Why? Mental blank. Maybe I do still feel sick. Ino quickly covered up. Shikamaru didn't seem to believe her, but he didn't question her either. He merely shrugged, then excused himself. Ino stood by herself for a while, wondering what she could do now. She decided to go home. Ino stared at the alleyway in shock. Of course her house wasn't here anymore. Ino slapped her forehead, then sighed. She scanned her surroundings, amazed by how industrial the area of her future home was. She has already forgotten what it looked like before their home was built. Ino suddenly felt her heart clench. If her home doesn't exist, if she's 16, if she's not married, then that means Kaguya and Minato were never born. Not yet at least. Ino felt like crying. How could she possibly live without her children? Ino turned around and slumped her way through the streets. Her mind was not set on a certain location, but she only knew one place to go now. Her parents' home. That's clearly where she lives now. Her home stood on the same old spot it used to be before the war. It somehow made her homesick, despite the fact that technically she was home. She clutched the cold doorknob and stepped inside into the family shop. She was greeted by the fresh aroma of flowers. Ino smiled. At least this place was still somewhat the same. Her mother was stationed behind the counter, where she was organizing a variation of flowers. She looked up, her red hair tied up in a bun on her head and her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Oh," Mrs. Yamanaka exclaimed, "welcome home, Ino. How was training?" Ino quickly said the first thing that entered her mind, "Great. Was it only Shikamaru and Koji? Or did you have another Jonin help you?" Mrs. Yamanaka asked. Ino frowned, not quite understanding what her mother meant. What other Jonin? Asuma would have helped them, wouldn't he? Ino trailed off, "Just us. Better safe than sorry," she decided. Her mother smiled weakly, "It must be so hard for you. Asuma's death affected all of you, after all." Ino's widened. Asuma was dead? She could not believe it. But just as quickly as the sadness wanted to take her, she realized that this was another dimension, an alternative universe to the one she came from. In her world Asuma might be alive, but here he was dead. What other surprises like these would she encounter? Ino shook her head. She wasn't going to encounter other surprises like them. She was going to find a way to undo the transfer and return herself and her other self to where they belong. After all, the jutsu might have a lot of negative side effects that she wasn't aware of yet. "I'm tired," Ino quickly evaded further investigation, "I'm going to bed." Mrs. Yamanaka looked worried, but nodded, "All right, I'll call you for dinner." Ino nodded slowly and disappeared upstairs where she collapsed on her bed and closed her eyes. She might know the cause of this accident, but she did not know the source, the risks or the outcome. In fact, she wasn't even sure how to reverse it. Why did this happen? Was someone out there looking for trouble? If only Ino could warn Naruto, he would have known what to do, but now the Naruto she knows is far out of her reach. How she wished she could hold him once more. Ino closed the door behind her and glanced at the Hokage monument. The morning sun shone brightly. It was a beautiful day. Ino sighed. So she didn't experience a nightmare last night, she really did transfer into her younger self. There were still only 5 faces on the mountain. Naruto wasn't Hokage, yet. Ino knew that she couldn't keep in the dark for too long. People will notice her personality change. She was 37 after all, a mature woman. She was married and had 2 children. She wasn't little Ino anymore. She had to tell someone. Someone with responsibility. Someone she could trust. Her only bet at this time would be Tsunade. Of course, she trusted Naruto above anyone else, but she highly doubted dense, 16-year-old Naruto would believe her. Tsunade it is. Tsunade was signing paperwork when she arrived at the Hokage office. Ino was welcomed inside warmly, but did not receive the bows that she got back home. Ino waited patiently for Tsunade to complete signing and look up. Tsunade finally did. "So, Ino, what brings you here today?" "We have a problem," Ino stated, decided to try and get right down to the point. Tsunade frowned. "What kind of problem?" "Well," Ino trailed off, "the best way to describe this would be that I'm not Yamanaka Ino." Tsunade did not move. Ino knew she was taking a gamble. Tsunade could after all claim that she was an intruder and summon the Umbu. Ino hoped the Hokage would do something more sensible. What do you mean? I am Uzumaki Ino. That's it for part 1. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.